Hey everyone, welcome back to the Makers Inc. podcast. I'm very excited today to be talking with a very good friend of mine, Jamie Rome. She's an associate creative director at Fallon. It's an advertising agency in New York City, and she's one of the most creative and sort of like classic makers that I can think of. So I'm excited to hear about her experiences working professionally in advertising and marketing, but also some of the side projects and side hustles she's done since I've known her. So Jamie, you want to give a little intro to yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Jamie Rome. Yeah, I've been working in advertising for 8 or 9 years now on the creative side. So I'm a creative director with a background in copy. In advertising, we work in pairs. So you're either copy or art direction. And yeah, I've done a lot of side projects in my life. So we'll chat about those.
Perfect. Maybe will you share a little bit more for maybe someone who isn't super familiar with like the sort of collaborative construct of advertising with copywriting and art direction, how that typically works?
Sure. Yeah, so in advertising, if you're on the creative side, you tend to work in pairs. So you have a copywriter and art director, and you get paired up at the very beginning of your career, even if you go to ad school. And so together you come up with ideas, and then you kind of, depending on what it is, if you're making a commercial or a huge campaign, the copywriter is obviously in charge of all the copy, whether it's writing scripts or something like that. And then the art director is kind of in charge of bringing the visuals to life. So yeah, you work together. I think someone in the 50s invented it in advertising, and we've done it ever since.
Does it still make sense even though it's so old?
I think it does. I think originally the thought was like writers have a more like technical way of thinking, and art directors are more like free flowing creatives. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case always, but I do think it helps to have a partner in the industry when you're coming up with creative ideas to be able to bounce stuff off of each other before you then have to present them to either like huge clients or your boss or whoever. And then you have this like yin and yang, and you can kind of look out for each other and make sure the ideas kind of are pushed as far as they can go. And you each bring something to the table as far as ideas go. So you kind of get more together.
So in typical maybe software development, the like pod or squad for software development is typically created or made up of a designer, a product manager, and an engineer. Is there like has the formula for copywriting evolved in any way to include someone who's like more technical as things have moved forward?
Yeah, so like your everyday is maybe like the writer art director pair, but at depending on the project, you might bring in someone, they're called like creative technologists, who are more experts on the technology side. So when I would work on projects that were more tech heavy or more digital, we would kind of brainstorm, then go to a creative technologist, bring them in, and they could help kind of tell us the best way to either execute it or build on the idea and like what was actually possible. Like the amount of times I pitched a hologram anyway.
Haven't gotten that one through yet.
Yeah, just biding my time.
How do you think about the difference between advertising and marketing?
So I guess advertising is just a piece of marketing. To me, marketing is more like, this is what I think on the client side, like they have all the information from their customers, and they have that information, and we're just a piece of that. So they come to us with certain problems that we help them figure out. But I guess advertising to me is just a piece of the bigger marketing picture. They kind of know what the customer is looking for and what products they need to be making and things like that. And we come in to just make sure that whatever they want to sell is being communicated in the most interesting, press-worthy way.
Got it. And so I spent a short stint in the beginnings of my career working at a advertising and marketing firm, and I remember feeling like the relationships with the client is like the obviously that's like the lifeblood of the agency, but it's also one of the most difficult things to balance as a either account manager or a creative person in that world.
Hmm.
How has your experience with clients been over the years?
It really depends on the client. Sometimes you have clients who really do want amazing work that pushes the envelope and like they want those press headlines. And sometimes you have clients who maybe you have to push or the growth is slow to get there. You kind of show them a small thing that works and then they're like, okay, I trust you a little, and you like build the trust over time. So it really just depends on the client. And what they're looking for. And you can kind of tell right off the bat if they're gonna kind of trust you or if you're gonna act more as kind of a bit more of like a production agency and you're kind of just making what they want and once in a while trying to get something through that you find more interesting.
What are some of those signals that this might be someone who trusts you and you can do some interesting stuff with?
I think usually when you're presenting creative ideas, you're presenting multiple ideas and you'll have it tends to be like a bit of a safer one, something a little more crazy, and something really crazy. And if you can get them here or here, they easily, they tend to be a great client. Or if they at least understand it, like that's amazing. Um, that's kind of it's like when you show them work. If they always are picking the safe option and then making it even safer, it tends to be harder to do more exciting creative work. So I think that's like the best way to test it. Just show them ideas and see what they go for.
Who are you typically presenting to in like a larger company?
On the client side?
Yeah.
Usually it's like the CMO would be the top, and then under the CMO, there's a whole marketing team. It just depends on the company. So usually you're presenting to some group of the marketing team. Sometimes the CEO is involved. It just depends how big or small the company is. But yeah, it's usually they have a team dedicated to kind of working with the agency and communicating their business problems with our strategists, and then we take those briefs and make the creative work, and it just kind of flows back and forth.
Got it. And are there any, I have this like idea in my head that someone who's like much older and been around for a really long time at a very large organization is going to be like super conservative and not want to do something interesting. Is it a good assumption that like it's someone who's younger who comes in who's likely to do something that's more creative and interesting, or is that a bad assumption?
As far as like in a CMO position or on the
Yeah.
marketing team,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think it's necessarily age. I think it's really just where the company is at the time. Like, are they like a small company with a smaller budget who needs to make a big splash for less money? They're willing to do riskier things than kind of like a huge company that everyone maybe already knows. They might not want to rock the boat. Or if sales are just going up and they're like everything's working, we're not in the need to do something groundbreaking, even though they always are. Everyone should be looking for that kind of work. But I think it just depends on the company and like where they are in the marketplace is who's looking for the exciting work, not necessarily if there's like a young or older CMO, because sometimes you have really startup companies and they've just never done it before, so they sometimes don't even know maybe what they're supposed to be looking for in the work. So there's like a lot more hand holding when we work with startups, kind of just explaining what's gonna happen. But usually startups tend to want exciting work because they're a small company in a big marketplace.
It's so interesting. There's a real parallel there for just like general innovation, where the larger a company is, the more successful they are, the more they have to protect, and therefore the more conservative they get and the less innovative they get. And then typically what happens is a startup with less to lose, but is willing to really push things forward, create something that's like 10 times better, and everyone moves away from the old company.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happens. I feel like that was a good example with like Old Spice or JetBlue. There's a lot of examples like that. Yeah, exactly.
So you've been working in advertising as long as I've known you. What is like your favorite project that you've worked on in your career?
Let me think. My favorite project. I mean, some projects are, let me think. I mean, I always like to shoot commercials. I think working with directors is super fun and they're so creative and just the coolest. So I also love doing activations. I'm trying to think what was the cool. I mean, one time we got to shoot something for PlayStation. We got to work with the New York City Ballet and create like victory dance videos with the best dancers in the world. The idea was called the world's best victory dance. And that was like a really cool project, and worked with a really cool director. It was fun. I mean, we had to shoot in New York. Usually you get to go travel and shoot. So we shot in like Brooklyn. It wasn't that exciting, but the actual project I thought was a really great idea. And the clients were on board to do something kind of out of the box for them. And it was really, really cool.
I think
But
I
yeah,
remember that one. It's like the dancers are all like decked out, kind of pseudo ballet, pseudo football
mhm,
gear, like all black. Yeah, super
yeah.
memorable.
Yeah. And that's I think definitely like, I believe at the time, like Xbox has huge marketing budgets. And so that's like who, the PlayStation, I think, has to be more innovative in their marketing sometimes. So, yeah.
So, I, correct me if I'm wrong, but at some point in the last like 3, 4, 5 years, you've also started teaching
hmm
advertising, right?
hmm
Could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I teach at the School of Visual Arts in New York, SVA. And yeah, I started about I think this is year 4. And you get a teaching partner in that too, because all the professors are professionals, unlike my education, where no one had ever worked in advertising. Anyway, so they know your schedules might be kind of aggressive if you're on a shoot for a month or whatever. So they give you a teaching partner there. But it's been really great. I think it's kind of funny. You never know how much you know until you have to teach someone else. And then you're like, oh, I'm a genius. Like you just like, you realize how much knowledge you really do have. You kind of think everyone knows because everyone around you is doing the same thing. But I think that's a really fun part about teaching. It's fun to see the kids like develop their ideas, and then at the end have these like amazing projects, campaigns for their books. A lot of them in our class decide they want to do advertising over design, which is always fun to see when they realize they're like really good at advertising. We're like, you should go this way. Um, yeah, and I think it gives you a good start into like how to manage young people younger than you. It's a good practice of giving feedback and kind of seeing what techniques work and how to motivate people to get more, because it can be exhausting. The kids have a ton of homework in design, and so how do you motivate them to put the time into the projects and things like that.
What has been the hardest thing for you around teaching?
Teaching, sometimes I think the hardest thing is just the time we would like to give to the class versus the time we actually have to give. Um, because you could spend, I mean, every day working on these projects. So I think it's just the balancing of like your job, your full-time job, and then teaching is probably the hardest thing. And then I would say the other hardest thing is it's when you have a kid who's uninterested or unmotivated, figuring out how to motivate them can be difficult, but they get there eventually.
Any tricks that you've learned?
um I feel like you kind of have to get to the root of it. Is it because they're an illustrator or designer and maybe they're just not that interested in advertising? And then it's like, okay, I get it. This isn't your path. So we just need to get you through this class. Or is it like sometimes they need a little, I wouldn't say scolding, but a little like firmer hand of like, hey, oh, actually, you know what the real trick is? Edit that last part out. Firm hand is weird. Okay, let me start that part over. It actually really works. And it's something that I think works for kindergartners too. When you make all the kids show their work. And when you give praise to the kids who really are kicking butt and like overachieving, it motivates the ones who aren't or didn't realize that that's what everyone else is doing. I think they do that, when you like praise a little kid, like, oh, good job with your coloring in the lines. And every other kid's like, oh, it's like that. I mean,
So
these are college kids. It's like different. They might not care, and that's fine. But that's one way that works pretty well.
is there is teaching something inherently creative more challenging, do you think?
Um, I don't think so. I personally think it would be our curriculum is whatever we want it to be based on like what is happening in advertising in general. So I know someone who teaches a class all about like pop culture thinking and advertising because that's kind of where our industry is. Like we create projects around like Netflix or Showtime because we know that's like a market that is big. So, or like doing activations for shows is kind of a big thing happening right now. So I find it much easier to have like the freedom to teach creatives creatively than if I had a structure that I either sticking to a structure that like, is this relevant anymore? You know?
I guess to some extent, it seems like the like student pool is fundamentally people who are at least pursuing some creative process if they're like illustrators and designers. So
Hmm.
it's not like
Yeah, it's a
scratch.
design. Yeah, it's an art school. So yeah.
Any advice? So Makers Inc., one of the big things I'm doing is working to teach people entrepreneurship, which is fundamentally a creative endeavor as well. Any
Hmm.
advice you have for me on how to communicate things more effectively?
Um, I feel like, let me think, for entrepreneurs, I feel like the biggest thing for entrepreneurs that I just feel like that would be the most helpful to communicate. I don't know about clearly communicating, but just the idea that like don't be scared to just put something out there into the world and see what happens. It doesn't have you don't have to know what the end result is going to be yet. Like that's the biggest thing. Don't worry if this isn't a $1 billion app or whatever result you think should happen. I think it's more fun to just like make something and see what happens, which is kind of what we teach our kids in advertising. It's like they're like, oh, I didn't have any ideas. Okay, well, you need 45. And so it's like you just start throwing things out there and like, yeah, so the first 20 might be dumb, but one in there is going to be good. And then we've got your final project. So I think yeah, it's just like, just start. I guess that's more advice than like how you should teach your students, but there you go.
No, I think that's so important. It's like I think one of the hardest things to learn, and like um, I'm like really grateful for having gone to architecture school because it forced me to learn this one thing that's like you are not your ideas, like divorcing yourself from your
Hmm.
ideas, so that when someone criticizes an idea that you had, you have to learn that like that's okay. That can die or it can evolve or change. You could come up with another idea, and it doesn't mean that you're bad. But I know
Hmm.
one of those things that's hard. It's hard to do. Um,
Yeah, because you can take it so personally. We say in advertising the rejection is like next level because think about it. You come up with your ideas and you reject some of them. Then your partner rejects some. Then your bosses reject them. Then your boss's bosses reject them. Then your client probably rejects some 5 more rounds. And then you eventually get to something, but it's not personal.
right. But I mean, you also bring up a really good point too, which is there we have these like filters. We have these mechanisms for our own rejection of ideas. We get feedback from other people, but the reality is
Hmm.
that you know they're kind of like proxies for what we think will happen when people actually engage with it, and people can develop expertise to be better at guessing whether something will or won't work. That's a lot of what the
Hmm.
expertise that you and your colleagues cultivate. But the reality is a lot of ideas you just have no idea how people are going to respond to them until you like make the thing and put it in front of people and actually see what happens.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we can do as much research we want in advertising, like for a campaign, and we're like pretty sure it's going to work. And usually they do, but you never know which ones will become viral for whatever random reason they take off. When clients ask you to make something viral, it's like, we can't guarantee this, but we know some things that will help. But it's like that. You just don't know. You just have to put it out there and see.
What is your take on is that a valid thing to ask for? Like for someone to come to you and say, "Hey, make something that will go viral." Is there even any way to predict it?
I mean, that was like after that ice bucket challenge. That's all we got asked. It was like, can you make it like the ice bucket challenge? No. But there are ways to do something there are certain ideas that are press worthy that the press will talk about or that you could pitch to the press and that are more exciting than your average idea. So it'd be more saying like just asking yourselves like, is this press worthy? Can we get press on this and that kind of thing? So more be and then there's ways to like amp it up if you have influencers participating, if you have that money, or if you have what else? And then there's other ways to like buy media correctly to help it along. But there's no way to guarantee like that kind of virality
Yeah,
if the idea is not good enough. Like if it's boring, no one cares.
right.
So
How big of a role do influencers play in advertising these days?
I mean, it's something it just depends on the idea if you're looking for a social campaign or what you're selling or how you're speaking to people. I don't think it ever hurts to have influencers who are relevant to what you're trying to sell, or if they're someone who actually uses the product, um, be a part of your campaign. But I think there's a balance of like people who actually use a product and make sense to like support your product versus using influencers, and people like the audience can see through something that's not real, you know? So if an influencer is pitching something that they pitch 100 products, all that, you know, they're always pitching products, it becomes less effective.
Yeah.
So it's a part of it. I wouldn't say it's like the whole thing, but there's ways to do it that are super interesting. Nike's Londoner campaign did it really well. What is his name? Marshawn Lynch loves Skittles, and he became like a Skittles influencer ambassador. So there's smart ways to do it that are most effective.
So your day job is working in advertising, but you've also been known to have a side project or two.
Yes.
So I would like to hear from you about a couple of those.
Okay.
Maybe we can start with turkey feet.
I have some props. Turkey shoes.
Turkey shoes. Yeah.
Turkey shoes. Okay. Let's tell the backstory. This was the first product I ever made. And this was really an experiment for me and my old partner in advertising to see if we could make something and people would want to buy it. So yes, we created turkey shoes. It was our first product we ever made. Me and my old advertising partner sung. And these were Thanksgiving shoes you put on your Thanksgiving turkey. Let me just show you. They came in 3 different pairs. So a silly idea. We just kind of wanted to see if we could create a product. We thought it was fun. Then what happened? So we ended up selling them one year. We sold them at we did a little pop-up at work. We sold them on the streets of New York. My partner chased down Bobby Flay, gave him a pair. We sold them, and we sold them on Etsy. And we were like, let's just see what happens. We made a bunch. So we sell them for this year. It was great. It was fun. We had an Instagram. Cut to a year later, we're at work, and my email starts blowing up right before Thanksgiving. I think I had 400 emails in an hour with orders for turkey shoes. I had not turned off the shop. And I looked at my partner's song and I was like, oh my God, we have 800 orders for turkey shoes. Mind you, we had 0 inventory. Margins on turkey shoes were like $2, so it's not that big of a deal. But we had to shut it down and tell all these people that we didn't have turkey shoes, and some people were devastated. One woman ordered 10 pairs and she was really distraught that we didn't have any. So that's when I say you never know what's gonna come about with your product. That was just an experiment. Turns out people loved them. So that's the story of turkey shoes. Our first product, which led to us creating many more products, because you realize it's not actually as hard as you think it is.
Wait, so I want to hear more about this. So you set up an Etsy shop.
Mm-hmm.
The first year. How many did you sell in the first year?
I don't know that we sold that. I mean, we drove our friends and family to Etsy, so we probably sold a couple hundred pairs in the first year, just friends, family, people we knew, people buying it for Friendsgivings. Nothing crazy, maybe 200 pairs. We made maybe $400.
What were the unit economics? Were you using a third party tool to cut these shapes out and package everything?
No, Grant, we weren't. We were hand cutting them, because to actually buy a tool to cut them would have cost $10,000 to buy a mold, which is bananas for this because we were testing, do people want this? Are we insane? That's what we were testing. So we were hand cutting them, which is why we did not fulfill the orders later on, because it just was so time consuming. Now looking back, we should have just made printables where people print them out themselves for $1, and we don't have to cut them, et cetera, et cetera. Looking back, that would have been a better way to go.
Can someone go to Etsy today and find turkey shoes, or is it
turn it off? It's gone. I have a couple packs. Please reach out to Grant if you like. I'm set. No, we turned it off just purely for I actually reached out to my old partner and asked if we could put up printables because I actually do think those would take off. But his computer was in Korea. It was a long thing, so we never got around to it. But that was the story of turkey shoes. And Bobby Flay never posted about them. Devastated.
He could have been that, like, influencer for turkey shoes.
I know, his loss.
So turkey shoes is amazing, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, it was the first project that you did where I saw you guys just had this idea and then you created it and then sent it around. And like, I definitely ordered a pair and it was just so much fun. Of course, it has some challenges as a business, being rather seasonal.
Very seasonal.
So that was your first project. It sort of opened the door. You were like, okay, like there were some challenges. This didn't quite work out how we wanted it to, but it sort of like revealed the potential of doing your own project. What are some of the other things that you guys have worked on?
Let me think. So then I'm trying to think what happened next. So I don't know what the order was. Another project I did was, let me just show up all my products. I made a children's book, Oops, the Fish Died. This was one of my more recent projects. But that again was like, oh, if we can make turkey shoes, I can make a book. And
you don't have to cut the book up yourself.
No, it had a lot of positives. And that again, I reached out to some friends of mine, a writer who is super funny and someone I work with and awesome. And I had the idea for this book about 12 or 10 fun fish funerals for when your pet fish dies for children. And I was like, you want to write this with me? And he said, sure. And then I knew an illustrator and I was like, let me just ask. That's another tip. Always just ask. I asked my best friend if her husband would be interested. And she was like, Tim, do you want to do this? And he said, yeah, I've been looking for a children's book. I want to make a children's book, but I don't want to write it. Ta-da. 1 year later, the book is made. It only took a year because Tim had a baby. And so it took a little longer. But that's still selling on Amazon. And we sold like 400 copies.
How did you guys, what's the like process for getting a book made?
There's a couple ways. We went through Ingramspark, and they will print the book. So all you have to do is submit your files. So you write the book, buy an ISBN number, submit your files correctly. Then they send you a copy of the book. You can triple check it, and then you can buy a bunch to sell in person to people. So we bought a couple boxes and we've like sold them to people, and then you can it uploads straight to Amazon, Walmart.com, Barnes and Noble. So it'll basically go everywhere and people can go there to buy it too.
So you could walk into a Barnes and Noble and find your book.
Just barnesandnoble.com. Yeah. I actually learned a lot about how hard it is to get a book in a store. It's like crazy hard.
What are like the filters for getting it into a store?
It's like you can get them into some stores, but if they don't sell, they either just throw them out or ship them back to you. So like the profit is like 0%. And then your book's not going to be like the one on display. It's going to be like in a shelf somewhere. So it gets a little tricky. And then I think just they're like Barnes and Noble and places like that are only going to sell books that have like been high sellers in other places first, because they only have so much shelf space. But the margins are tight on books, just FYI.
Do you have any desire to create another book, or is this another learning opportunity?
I guess never say never, but I'm kind of someone who like once I do it once, I'm like, okay, that was fun. But yeah, I've had a lot. I mean, every time you tell someone you've written a children's book, I feel like everyone has an idea to do it. And it's really not that difficult. You just like, it's not. Finding an illustrator might be the hardest part if you don't know someone, but that's it. You can get one on Fiverr.
And maybe they could just call Tim if they need someone to help.
Yeah, call Tim. I don't know if he'll ever do it again. No, he would. I think we all had a lot of fun doing it. And I think when you're a creative, having a project where you're the final say is like such a treat. Yeah. Like where the end product is just whatever you thought was coolest. So I had someone the other day tell me their daughter was reading the book. It was so cute. So it's really fun. That's a fun amazing project.
That's such an interesting point. I think it's worth like touching on. I agree. I think that it's so important, like regardless of what you do, whether you're in a creative field professionally or not, I think there's so much value in having a project that you're the complete owner over, and you get to come up with the idea, sort of see it through the different stages, and like you said, be the person who has final say. I think it's helpful for like learning new skills. It's helpful for um, just having a project that is like your creation, that is like a complete expression of like your ideas. I think it's just incredibly helpful for a variety of different reasons, regardless of what you do. So that's super cool. Maybe tell me about, I'm curious about your, I think it was called Cheddar. Is that right?
Yes, the app. Okay,
app.
we made something else. So me and my same Turkey Shoes partner, this was, I helped, but this was probably more of his like baby. But anyway, so had an idea for this app called Cheddar, which is made. I'm pretty sure it's still in the App Store. The idea was for on college campuses to let students kind of exchange or put up items they have for sale, couches, beer pong tables, whatever it is. And then they can sell to only other students. So it's like student exclusive, because there's like kind of certain things you need when you live in a dorm, like custom built shelves and things like that. And then just kind of more fun, like game day stuff in different kind of categories of things that students could sell to each other, like sororities selling to other, the younger people in the sorority, etc. So we made this app. The process for that was a little different. We had someone we were working with to develop the app, and then we quickly realized they didn't maybe necessarily have the skills to do it as quickly as we wanted, or they were kind of learning as we went. And so that didn't really work. So we ended up reaching out to some freelancers in Korea, because my old partner was Korean, and they were willing to do it for like a really good price. So they built the app and had a lot of like nice insights about how the functionality should work. And then we at the time were working through work with like an incubator program. So we pitched it to some people there, just to kind of get their feedback. They thought it was really cool, and they were like excited that the product existed, because I think a lot of people go in and pitch things that like haven't been developed yet in any sort of way. And so we promoted it at the school we teach at. We had some kids using it and things like that. Though I think like a small design school isn't necessarily the ideal place. I think this app would work much better at a large state school where there's tons of kids, moving and etc., like different houses and things. And then we kind of just let it ride because my partner had a baby and we had to just take a break. But it exists, and he's actually I think really heading like going full throttle into the world of teaching. So I do have a feeling this app is going to come back in some kind of way eventually, because it exists and people like it.
That's cool. Do you have a sense of like, what was the strategy for making money? Was there a strategy for making money, or was it more like build it and see if people use it?
Yeah, the strategy for us was like, make it free. Let's see if people use it. How do we get people on here? And then the strategy for making money would be like, if you have this engaged college audience, can you do through the app, discounts on, partner with Apple and do discounts, like exclusive discounts on MacBooks one day, or like things like that. So kind of like in a way advertising, but more like student discounted products and information through the app. So that would be like eventually where it would go. It's been a minute. There were probably more ideas. I just can't remember what they were.
So is your involvement there more kind of like wait and see how it goes with if it comes back to life, or is that one you're sort of pushing and rooting for?
I could see it coming back to life, but I don't know how much involvement I would personally have with it. I think it would be something my partner would like take on within his new like trajectory. Yeah. I would help, but
What was the biggest like learning experience or takeaway from doing a digital product like an app?
Let's think. That was, it wasn't so far away from things we have to do at work sometimes, like building out like the UX for different websites or apps or things like that. And so it wasn't really that. I feel like the biggest learning for us was working with a partner who maybe didn't work out, and like how do you navigate that? How long do you let that go until it's kind of like, this isn't working, we don't have this kind of time, we're going to go with someone else. And like, I don't know, I feel like that was like a learning experience in itself.
What, like what advice would you give to someone? Did you wait too long? Did you like, how did you handle that conversation? Like for someone who hasn't been through that experience, or maybe they're going through it right now, what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think it's all about like clear communication. I think just being clear on like what you're expecting, when you're expecting it. And if that person you slowly realize maybe doesn't have the skills or isn't delivering for whatever reason, I don't know, I'm kind of like, maybe give them one more chance. And then if it's still not happening, it's all professional. Like again, with like, it's not at that point, it's like, we need you to do X, you're not able to do it, we're going to have to go with someone else. It's not personal, even though, you feel bad.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I guess my thing would just be like, make sure you're communicating super clear about what you expect. And if it's not happening and you have a different choice that can deliver, just move on.
Yep. So you mentioned you had props, plural. You've shown a couple. Is there more hiding down there that you want to share?
No, I'm trying to think of other things, side projects I've had.
I have a prop to interrupt you. This is the one that I was going to talk about.
Of course. No, yes. The Send the Love collection. Love it. Okay, this is my, oh my God, like, how did I forget? It's the most recent thing I did. So I created a shop called sendthelove.com over COVID. And I partnered again with a designer I know. And originally I've been trying to figure out maybe like, is there something else I want to do outside of advertising? And I thought about developing a line of ski clothes, but I was like, I want to I was in like a 3-month program. And so I wanted to do something within that time frame. So I was like, let's see what it's like to make a line of drop shipping clothing. And is this something I'm interested in? And then I would take the next step to like a line of ski clothes would be a lot more intense. So learned a lot about drop shipping, created this line of products. They were all kind of nice messages on products you would send to friends and family who you maybe missed during COVID. Like Grant's mug said, I miss everyone. There was like happy thoughts, things like that, designed by a very cool designer I know. So yeah, we created the store and kind of shared with friends and family, had people sharing it out. People were buying our clothes, wearing them, posting them on social media. Yeah, so that was the most recent project to kind of see if again, just like throwing it out into the world, let's see what happens and see if I'm interested in that kind of side business.
Turns out, yeah, I was going to say, so what did you learn?
That it was super fun. We learned how much like time and work, which is obvious, but how much like social media presence and how much content we would need to be creating to kind of back up this store and like set the tone for the store, which we knew, but when you're actually having to create it, it's super time consuming. So that was good learning. And then we learned that there is definitely a more profitable way than going through a drop shipper. Like
Tell me about that
like,
process. I'm like
yeah.
roughly aware of drop shipping, but I'd love to hear what
Okay.
it was like.
Yeah, so there's a couple different drop shippers who do it's like such an interesting business. Okay. So there's different drop shippers. There's Printful, Printify, there's some more. Those are kind of the big ones. And basically you can design t-shirts, mugs, anything, not anything, but a lot of things, blankets, pillows, sweatshirts, etc. And you can put your designs on them. And then through Shopify, you can make a storefront for free and drive people to buy on your Shopify site. And then the drop shipper basically prints your items, ships them, and you get a percentage of the profits, and they do too. So it saves you from having, if you want to try or see if you have like, oh, I have an idea for a clothing line, let me see if it's going to work before I go buy 500 shirts and hope to sell them. This is an easy way to do it because you don't have any inventory and you don't have to worry about all the shipping. They do everything. The profit margins are smaller, but it's a very good way to test the market if you had an idea that you could be done through drop shipping. So yeah, that it was a super interesting learning experience. But we got the shop up in like a month. It probably would have been faster, except COVID. They wouldn't let you upload new designs at one point because they were so backed up because of COVID.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what did, going into that project, like, how have you thought about evaluating its success? Was it like a learning experience? Was it, hey, we're going to test this and see if it is worthwhile for us to invest in buying a bunch of stuff and in shifting away from shipping? Like, how have you thought about evaluating it since the launch?
Yeah. So kind of evaluating a couple things. So yeah, like profitability wise, we netted out pretty much, like didn't lose any money, didn't make a ton of money. But you if we were to continue, we would see like what are our best selling items and try to figure out how to start screen printing them ourselves if you really wanted to like blow it up. Because that would just make it so much cheaper. Or so much more profitable. The amount you lose in drop shipping is wild. So I would probably start doing it ourselves if you really want to like make good money doing it. For custom pieces. Then the other thing I think we realized quickly, me and my designer friend, is kind of like this idea was like super cute and the products are really fun, but it wasn't actually our vibe. We kind of realized like, who are we? This isn't really who we are. So it was a very far leap from like a very cool line of ski clothes. So I think that kind of played a role into it. We're like, we like these products and they're cool, but like if we would want to like totally pivot this business in a different direction if we kept going. And then I think there was a learning of like, we're both very busy. We both have full-time jobs, and kind of like a little bit of the shop depends on the designer. If you're designing your own items and you're not the designer, the new designs can only go as fast as the designer has available time. So it's like when you're partnering with someone, of course, and how do I say this? When you have a partner and you're waiting on them maybe, or they're super busy with work, so you're just kind of waiting to drop new designs, like it's a little bit starts to become out of your hands. And so for me, I prefer where like whether my partners are taking extra time or whatever, I realize I prefer to have a business where I'm in charge of everything. Or where like you have control to keep going and it doesn't like require fully waiting on someone else maybe.
I think this is an incredibly important thing to think about, and for people to be sort of selective in the type of business that they pursue,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the early stage, because before you get started, you get to choose everything about it, like what market you're in, what the product or service is, who you collaborate
Mm-hmm.
with, and you should be really thoughtful about who you're going to collaborate with. Not because people are bad and always out to get you. It's more like, especially in the early stages, it's hard to find people who are exactly on the same page about how much effort and energy they want to put into something. And
Yes.
it can be exactly what you just said, where if two people who have a full-time job and one of them sees this as a fun thing to do once a week, or maybe this is something that
Mm-hmm.
someone else wants to do every night before and after work. And like, if you're not on the same page, that's going to cause a lot of friction. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's helpful if you can start at least in the beginning to be like a company of one, being someone who can at least, do the core function of the business by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then as it grows and there's need for more expertise or more skills in different areas, you can bring people on.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it. I kind of pitched it as like a fun side project, and I was like, let's go. So there was it's like, yeah, exactly. So you have to make sure you're communicating what you really mean.
What was your experience with using Shopify? You mentioned it was free to set up the website, um, and it only took about a month to get everything together.
Yeah,
Generally
I should
positive,
say the
or-
template was free, but then you pay like a monthly. That's
got
more
it.
specific. Yeah. Yeah, I found it to be really easy to set up on the back end. I mean, there's some tricky things like it's a whole section about taxes and like making sure you had like a privacy policy and things like that, but they're in there, you just copy paste. So they're like just new things to learn. I've had my own portfolio website for a long time, so I've familiar with like Squarespace and things like that. So it wasn't such a stretch, but it was very easy to set up like a super simple shop to sell product. I would say very easy.
Got it. And you mentioned in terms of marketing, it seems like the strategy was like social media content creation,
Hmm.
um, and like coming to the realization like if that's your strategy, it's like you're on that train and it's just like never stops. You kind of have to keep
Yeah.
producing.
Yeah. And to be fair, we did run a couple Facebook ads and things like that that drove traffic, but that isn't my expertise. And now it's something that I'm like, oh, if I ever do something like that again, I'm really going to have to dive deep and learn how to test those, make them effective, and have like a budget to do that kind of testing that I'm willing to put in, you know?
Absolutely. So what are you working on these days? Anything new that you can preview here?
Oh my gosh. Honestly, there's nothing that's coming to mind. I don't actually have any side projects, though I will say I've been thinking a lot. This is like what's probably coming. I've had quite a few people reach out to me over COVID about helping them negotiate, whether it's like new jobs or current job salaries. And I've been told that I'm good at that. And so I've been thinking a lot about setting up some kind of like, how can I help people do that? Because I think it's so fun when people get more money. Especially women, I'll throw that out there, just like stepping up, asking for what you want and getting paid correctly. So there might be something in that world coming. What that is, I don't know yet. But side projects, you just let your mind wander and they come to you.
Oh, there's one other thing I was going to ask you about.
Mm,
Speaking of like letting your mind wander and letting ideas come to you, I was going to ask you about like there's sort of this trope of like ideas coming to people while they're in the shower or when you're least expecting it. Is there a time of day or an activity that you find is like actually a helpful way for sort of inducing ideas to come?
Um, I'll say for me, I think everyone has their own way that like works for them. For me, I tend to be like laying down or like super comfortable, like sitting at a desk at work. I cannot sit and brainstorm to come up with ideas. I have to be like, I used to lay on a couch all day at work. That was so unprofessional. Whatever, I had great ideas. But yeah, I tend to be like more relaxed. I like to be like just in a relaxed space. And then I think for me, ideas tend to come for me in like, I wouldn't say the middle of the night. I don't like wake up from a sleep, but like if my mind is racing about something, I got good advice from a professor a long time ago. Like if your mind is racing about ideas for advertising or in general, I think just start like grab a notebook and get them all out and then go to sleep or go do whatever. But if your mind's like starting to churn, I don't know if you can like you have that sensation, but like then get them all down and then move on. Like try not to interrupt that. That happened one time. I had insomnia for some weird reason, and that's how I came up with the fish book. So I don't know. The shower, no, but just in a relaxed space. And there's a book called The Artist Way that has like you're supposed to journal for 5 minutes every morning and um read 5 minutes of something interesting to you. And then I feel like maybe meditate for 5 minutes. And people find that really helpful if that helps anyone listening. But yeah, I'm not sure. I
So
feel like it's just
I have in the past, I've never been big on like writing down ideas. And not until recently, I realized like when I exercise, I have a whole bunch of ideas that
mm,
maybe typically I would just sort of like ignore or be like, oh, I'll think of that later. And I never think of it later.
mm-mm.
So I started keeping a piece of paper and like in the middle of like working out, I'll just start like jotting down ideas, which is, I know sounds really crazy, but in part it helps me like flush out a bunch of bad ideas. You just once you write it down, you stop thinking about it. You know, like don't
Mhm.
feel the need to revisit it. Or I've found if I continue to have the same idea, it's like it's one of those filters of like I return back to the things that are intriguing or interesting to me because there's something there rather than it just being some kind of like fleeting thought.
Mhm. No, yeah, I think anytime when your mind like like physically active and your mind gets a chance to relax is when it starts to like swirl. And that's why people, probably the shower works, or like if you take 10 minutes to go sit outside and just like write down anything you think of, it kind of like whenever your mind has a chance to relax, I think it starts thinking of weird stuff in a
That's
good way.
perfect. That's maybe a good place to call it. Maybe the one last question before we go. So
Sure.
we sort of touched on this a little bit, but as I mentioned, the Makers Inc. project is pretty early for me. Any advice you have for me going forward?
I think what you're doing is great. I think talking to people who are makers and different types of makers will lead you to like anything else you'd want to add to your project. I think, the best thing to do is talk to people about like how they did it, what worked, what didn't. Because as they say, like someone's always done it before you. So go get that free advice to an extent.
Absolutely. All right, Jamie Rome, thank you so much.
You're welcome.